There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, in the back room of a small veterinary clinic, in the stillness before something breaks open that can never quite be closed again. This is one of those moments, and to understand why it matters, you have to go back to where it began. It began on the side of a dirt road, in the kind of place most people pass through without slowing down. Late autumn. The fields had already gone gold and dry, and the sky carried that particular shade of gray that settles over the land before the first real cold. A wildlife rehabilitator named Mara was driving home when something at the edge of the tree line made her ease off the gas. It wasn't movement exactly, it was the absence of it. A shape, low to the ground, tucked against the base of a fence post. She almost kept going. Later she would say she didn't know why she stopped. What she found there was a bobcat, barely more than a juvenile, though it was hard to tell under the state it was in. Its left rear leg was badly injured, likely from a vehicle strike or a trap. Its ribs pressed visibly through matted, dull fur. Its eyes were open but unfocused, carrying that distant, glassy look that wildlife workers recognize immediately. It was the look of an animal that has already begun the slow process of letting go. Most experienced rehabilitators would have called it, assessed the injuries, noted the level of distress, and made the difficult but practical decision that transport would only prolong suffering. Mara had been doing this work for 11 years. She knew what that look meant. She wrapped the bobcat in the emergency blanket she kept behind her seat and drove 40 minutes to the nearest exotic animal vet without stopping once. The first week was brutal. The bobcat, a male they determined, somewhere between 8 and 14 months old, ran a fever that wouldn't break. The leg required surgical intervention. He refused food for 5 days straight, which in an animal already that depleted is not a good sign. The vet told Mara plainly, some animals, when they reach a certain threshold of trauma, simply stop fighting. It isn't cruelty, it's biology. The body makes a calculation, and sometimes the calculation doesn't go the way you hope. She nodded. She went home. She came back the next morning before the clinic opened, sat beside his recovery kennel, and talked to him in a low, even voice about nothing in particular. The weather, the color of the fields, a song she half remembered from childhood. She did the same thing the morning after that, and the one after that. By the end of the second week he was eating, small amounts reluctantly, but eating. By the end of the third, the fever had broken for good. The leg would heal, the vet said, though there might always be a slight unevenness to his gait. He would likely never be fully releasable. Too much human contact during a critical developmental window, too much dependency built in through necessity. Some wildlife advocates would call that a tragedy. Mara called it a life. She named him Sage. What followed over the next several months was not a domestication. That word implies something deliberate, something imposed, a human bending a wild creature toward their own comfort. This was nothing like that. Sage remained exactly what he was, alert, instinct-driven, unpredictable in the way that all wild things are unpredictable, capable of stillness so complete it felt like a held breath. He did not become tame. He became something rarer than tame. He became specific. He chose Mara the way wild animals sometimes choose, not out of need alone, but out of something harder to name, recognition maybe, or the particular quality of trust that only forms between two living things who have witnessed each other at their most fragile. He followed her through the large outdoor enclosure she had built on her property, not closely, not clingingly, but with a steady, unhurried attention. He rested near her when she worked. He tolerated, and then gradually welcomed, the long silences they spent together at the end of the day, her sitting on a low wooden bench, him stretched nearby in the grass, his amber eyes half closed, tracking the movement of birds at the tree line. When something startled him, a car backfiring on the road, a sudden change in wind, he would move toward her rather than away. Not for protection, she understood that. For orientation, she was the fixed point in a world that still sometimes felt too large and too loud. She documented everything carefully. His weight, his diet, his behavioral patterns, his energy levels. She had done this work long enough to know that animals in non-releasable situations require constant monitoring, that what looks like stability can shift without warning. She watched for the signs. She thought she knew what to look for. She did not see this coming. The change, when it arrived, was gradual at first, the way most serious things are. A slight dip in appetite, a preference for lying in the shade rather than moving through the enclosure, a quality to his eyes in the morning that was different from sleep, different from calm, something older, something quieter. She told herself it was the change in season. She told herself he was just adjusting. She told herself a lot of things in the days before she finally loaded him into the transport carrier, her hands steady and her face composed, and drove the 40 minutes back to the clinic where this had all begun. She had saved his life once in this car, on this road with this gray sky overhead. She was not yet ready to understand what she was driving toward now. The vet's name was Dr. Calloway, and he had treated Sage twice before. Once for a minor infection, once for a torn pad on his front right paw. He knew the animal, he knew Mara, and when he finished his examination that afternoon and stepped back from the table, the look on his face told her everything before he said a single word. Sage's body was failing. His organs were under significant stress, likely the compounded result of his early trauma, the long recovery, and an underlying condition that had been quietly progressing beneath the surface, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already won most of the fight. His breathing was labored. His weight had dropped sharply in a short period of time. His gums were pale. Dr. Calloway listed the findings in the careful, measured way that good vets do, not cold but precise, because precision in those moments is its own form of kindness. Mara listened. She asked 2 questions. Then she was quiet for a long time. The treatment options were limited and, given Sage's condition, more likely to cause suffering than to reverse it. Dr. Calloway didn't push. He laid out what was possible and what was probable, and then he waited, the way good doctors do, for the person in front of him to find their way to the decision that was already forming whether they wanted it to or not. She did not cry in the office. She had learned, over 11 years of this work, to hold herself together in the rooms where the animals needed her to be steady. She stroked Sage's head. He allowed it, leaning slightly into her palm, his breathing shallow and slow, and she told Dr. Calloway that she needed a day. She took him home that night. She sat with him in the enclosure long after the light had gone, her back against the wooden post of the fence, his warm weight settled close beside her in the dark. She talked to him the way she had in that first terrible week, low even, about nothing and everything. The weather, the stars appearing one by one above the tree line. A song she half remembered from childhood. In the morning she called the clinic. She made the appointment, and 3 days later she drove that 40-minute road one final time, her hands steady on the wheel and her eyes fixed straight ahead, telling herself she was doing the right thing, telling herself this was love too, maybe the truest kind. She almost believed it. The room was small and still, the way those rooms always are. Mara stood at the end of the table, both hands resting lightly on Sage's side, feeling the shallow, uneven rise and fall of his breathing. Dr. Calloway stood opposite her, the syringe prepared, his expression composed in that careful, practiced way, present but already gently retreating, the way people do when they are preparing themselves to witness something final. His technician stood near the door. Nobody spoke. Sage lay on his side, his eyes half open, his body depleted in a way that was hard to look at directly. This was not the animal who had tracked birds at the tree line with focused, amber-eyed patience. This was not the animal who had pressed his warm weight against Mara's leg in the long evening silences. This was something reduced, stripped down by whatever had been quietly dismantling him from the inside. Mara kept her hands on him and kept her breathing even and told herself one more time that she was doing the right thing. Then Sage moved. It was slow, it was effortful in a way that was almost unbearable to watch, the visible exertion of a body that had very little left to give. He shifted his weight, repositioned his front legs, and then, with a deliberateness that did not look like weakness, he lifted himself just enough to press forward into Mara's chest. His head tucked beneath her chin, his legs trembling with the effort, wrapped as much as they could around her, holding on. Not the reflexive movement of an animal in distress, something more intentional than that, something that asked, without language, to be held back. Mara broke, quietly, completely, the kind of breaking that doesn't make much sound. Dr. Calloway did not move. He was watching Sage's breathing, and something about it had shifted in a way that stopped him, not the fading, slowing rhythm he had been observing, but something irregular, strained, a quality that didn't match the picture he had assembled. He lowered the syringe slowly, almost without realizing he had done it. He leaned forward. He listened again, carefully, differently, with the particular attention of someone who has just noticed a detail that doesn't belong. The sound was wrong, not the wrong of an animal at the end of its life. The wrong of an animal fighting something specific, something physical, something that might, if he was reading it correctly, and he had been doing this long enough to trust when something didn't fit, be the source of everything. He straightened up. "Wait," he said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Everything stopped. Mara looked up. Dr. Calloway was already reaching for his stethoscope, his face no longer composed but alert, focused, moving with the quiet urgency of a man who has just realized there is still something left to do. The syringe never found its mark. Dr. Calloway moved quickly. The shift in the room was total, the grief of moments before folding itself into something sharper, more urgent. He called for his technician. He asked Mara to stay close, to keep her hand on Sage, to keep talking to him in that low, steady voice, because the Bobcat was still holding on, pressed against her, breathing hard but holding on, and that contact, Dr. Calloway had learned over decades of practice, was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. What the further examination revealed was this: a significant obstruction affecting Sage's airway and chest cavity, something that had developed gradually, quietly, in a place that the earlier assessments had not reached. It was serious. It required immediate intervention, but it was treatable. Not a certainty, Dr. Calloway was careful to say. Not a guarantee, but a real chance, a genuine one. Mara nodded. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. She said, "Do whatever you can." The hours that followed were the longest of her life. She sat in the small waiting area of the clinic, the same waiting area she had sat in 11 years ago after her first difficult rescue, and she did what she had always done in rooms like that. She stayed still, and she waited, and she did not let herself think too far ahead. 1 hour, then the next. Late that evening, Dr. Calloway came through the door. He was tired, but his face had changed. Sage was stable. The days that followed were slow and careful. Mara was there every morning before the clinic opened, and every evening until they asked her to go home. She talked to him through the recovery kennel the same way she had in the very beginning, about the weather, about the fields, about nothing and everything. And gradually, the way it had happened once before, he began to come back. His breathing evened out. His eyes regained their focus. On the 4th day he stood, unsteady, thin, but standing. When they finally brought Mara into the room, Sage lifted his head and watched her cross toward him, and when she was close enough, he did what he had done on the table. He leaned in, pressed himself against her, not with desperation this time, not with the last reserves of a body in crisis, with the calm, unhurried weight of an animal that knows exactly where it is and exactly who it is with. Mara put her arms around him and stayed there for a long time. Outside, the fields had gone quiet. The sky was turning that deep, particular blue that comes just before full dark, the kind that makes everything feel both small and significant at once. She had driven this road believing she was letting go. She drove it home understanding something she hadn't known before, that sometimes the ones we love find a way to reach us, not to say goodbye but to ask us to stay just a little longer. And sometimes, if we're paying attention, that is enough.